it not abhor you to hear and understand of a rabble of so great and unaccustomed lewdness, of a man in every way so vile, to go thus freely unpunished? What I have just cited is, of course, an example of an exuscitatio. The exuscitatio is an emotional utterance designed to sway the audience to experience the same feeling. And it is used in this article to great effect.
The article here referred to is drawn from an editorial in the Toronto Globe and Mail entitled, "Available Remedies to Relieve World Poverty." This editorial is a ringing endorsement of a report by the World Bank decrying the sorry state of world poverty. It celebrates the good sense of the World Bank in providing suggestions for a cure.
And here is an alliteration, or the repetition of consonant sounds. A great deal of progress, it reads, but not nearly enough. Note the na, has been made in the past 3 decades to reduce third world poverty.
The alliteration is the least tasteful of them all, certainly the most familiar. Every schoolboy knows what an alliteration is. Reason enough, I would think, to dust off its original name, the Paromian.
The next sentence is rich in complexity. Between 1965 and 1985, consumption in developing lands soared by almost 70%. Here, progress is identified with consumption. To say that the rate of consumption, hovering steadily around 0, has, in the course of 20 years, soared by almost 70%, is to apply the catachresis.
The catachresis is the inappropriate application of a term to something it cannot properly denote. This is indeed a daring application of a catachresis, as African economists have demonstrated that in the 1980s, general living standards in Africa fell by 20%.
The first part's easy. Swimmers want to swim. There is nothing they would rather do at this moment than swim. They have a most vivid and relentless fantasy which recurs over and over again, and that fantasy is to swim in Lake Mead. It is a simple fantasy, authentic and clear, not a screen behind which are concealed secret, unknown intentions. At times this fantasy begins quietly to overtake them, to press itself upon them. They come to realize that they are not without some freedom to act. There is nothing to prevent them from getting up, retrieving their bathing suits and fulfilling this fantasy. They both have cars. There is nothing to stop them. At this moment then, regardless of anything else they may be, they are swimmers. We watch this disposition to swim grow stronger, for they are now swimmers, and swimmers must swim.
A catachresis also goes by the name of abusio, as it refers to the abuse of metaphorical speech. But interestingly, the editorial here begins a series of procatalepses. Imagine, if you will, a man who has a substantial amount invested in defending his opinion. Because of this personal investment, he is no longer agreeable to free and open discussion.
Such a man will anticipate menacing arguments which he knows are valid and which therefore undermine his own arguments. He will then begin shrewdly to undermine them before they emerge. This is called a procatalepsis.
Strange and powerful forces compel one to seek remedies. Even for evil, one ferociously denies. Strange and powerful forces compel one to seek remedies. Even for evil, one ferociously denies creating.
One of the more cunning ways to demonstrate one's rhetorical virtuosity is to leap deftly over flaws which one knows to exist in one's own argument. This is the epitrachasmus, or the uncommonly swift movement from one statement to another.
The epitrachasmus often conspires with metastasis, which occurs when an issue is passed over quickly. Winston Churchill used a metastasis in a rather self-satisfied way in response to a news reporter when he said, "I think no comment is a splendid expression." No comment.
Many people criticize the absence of open political debate, but here it has paved the way for a hysteron proteron, one of the truly graceful and cultivating rhetorical devices of all time. A hysteron-proteron occurs when there is a reversal of the temporal order, as when Virgil said, "Let us die and rush into the heart of battle."
But now what? Persons become swimmers, and those swimmers complete their identities for that moment by swimming. Yet there is something else. There is uncertainty, and there's emptiness. Perhaps it's nothing more than a mistaken desire to swim. They may now truly be swimmers, but is that really enough? Is that all there is? Surely there's more. The original fantasy has not been honored. For what has this to do with Lake Mead?
No. During the period cited in this report, large areas of the world declined significantly in consumption and life expectancy while child mortality increased. This is precisely the reverse of what was cited in the World Bank report and echoed in the editorial, and that is why I think it correct to call this a hysteron-proteron.
We are reminded here of the metallipsis. A metallipsis is a fallacious attribution of causal connection. An example would be, "That man is evil. We must therefore destroy the country where he was born."
But against that background of achievement, it says, it is all the more staggering and all the more shameful that more than 1 billion people in the developing world are living in poverty.
This is, and I would be quite willing to verify it if necessary, a textbook example of the apomnemesis, or the citation of an approved authority. But it also reveals that unlikely sources like the World Bank, not expected to demonstrate eloquence in their prose, can indeed be deeply moving and at times even poignant, given the right topic.
Note the phrase, "it is all the more staggering and all the more shameful." This is a particularly handsome example of the conduplicatio, the repetition of words in succeeding clauses.
We will quickly note in passing another fine series of alliterations. There is firstly, poverty properly, which has to its credit a perichesis, the repetition of both vocalic and consonantal sounds.
But it would be a mistake to think that Lake Mead is a little more than a whimsical illusion, an error. Being the biggest reservoir in the United States of America, it is very real in many ways, and it is not outside our ability to know Lake Mead in at least some of these ways. The origins of Lake Mead do not fade back into the mists of prehistoric time, as is the case with most lakes. Lake Mead was invented in 1935. But what made Lake Mead? Why does it exist? Why was it constructed? To know Lake Mead, we have to know why it is there.
There are many ways to know the Hoover Dam and endless ways of describing it. We know the veneration in which it is held as a national monument and the feeling of awe that it arouses in those who behold its sublime, formidable presence. Note the sheer embeddedness of the body of the dam in its natural surroundings. We know that there is only one Hoover Dam and only one location for it. We know exactly where to go should we wish to be directly acquainted with the dam. We know how high the dam is and how many million cubic meters of concrete were required to make it. If we wanted to, we could attempt to discover why exactly it was made in the first place and how many people died in its construction. It is only necessary that we remain aware of the pseudominos, a type of argument which forces one's adversary to lie. We know the history of the dam's planning and construction, and we know of the president of the day, who himself an engineer, participated directly in discussions of its design and feasibility. We know how much revenue is generated per acre on the land that it irrigates, and how many million kilowatts of power it produces. We know the allotments of water and electricity accorded each state in the region. We also know the salt content of the water being sent to Mexico after it has been filtered many times through once barren American landscapes. And of course, we can also contemplate the crushing power of the water, surging through the awesome and unyielding body of the dam. And just as the water moves endlessly through the fixity of the dam, so too does time flow inexorably past the moment of the dam's inception.
There is here, moreover, a means much more, for good measure. Not to mention the mirror in the sequence means much more than the mirror. Although it has been correctly pointed out that an alliteration can sacrifice subtlety and approach ostentation when the repetitions begin to accumulate unduly.
Yes. Well, the following complex sentences of roughly equal length repeat a grammatical structure while changing the words. This is the isocolon. The grammatical form goes as follows. It is ... semicolon, and ... period. The structure is deployed in the next sentence for very symmetrical repetition. It is a life expectancy of 41 years in Niger, compared with 77 years in Canada, semicolon, and a mortality rate among children under 5 in South Asia that exceeds 170 deaths per thousand, in contrast to 10 deaths per thousand in Sweden, period. It is the heavy toll that malnutrition takes on pregnant women. Of the 500,000 women who die each year in childbirth, 99% are in developing countries, semicolon. And on the third world children who cheat the infant mortality statistics, 110 million of whom lack access to primary education, period.
It reads, the World Bank's Poverty Study, World Development Report 1990 recommends, with a tone of undisguised urgency, that ineffective economic models for alleviating poverty be abandoned in favor of a more widespread application of policies that have met with success. The indisputable authority of the World Bank is summoned up once more, but this time in a sinister alliance with the notorious dialogismus.
Or speaking in the place of another, the dialogismus lies at the very core of this editorial. The World Bank is governed by industrialized countries who inherit voting rights according to their economic strength. The headquarters of the World Bank were installed in Washington at Washington's insistence, and the president of the World Bank is forever American.
We shouldn't forget that there has been a great deal of bitterness on the part of third world countries directed towards the World Bank's harsh credit conditions, which force poor countries to cut back on and even eliminate what few social services they were able to offer.
A professor of economics at the University of Ibadan, Badi Onimori, calls the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund the new masters, forcing the third world countries to integrate into the Western economic system whether they want to or not.
The irony is that in Africa, the first world takes home in profits much more capital than it invests. Very skillful.
Very skillful indeed. Eerie almost.
There is a formidable wit in the use of the double dialogismus. For while the editorial in the Globe and Mail firstly speaks in the voice of the World Bank in turn has spoken in place of its third world clients.
Badi Onimori claims that the policies of the World Bank and the IMF contribute greatly to many military coups, like that in Chile.
And so for all that, the one sure thing is that you cannot know anything about the Hoover Dam simply by looking at it, or by looking at pictures of it. Consequently, the Minister of the Interior commissioned an artist to commemorate this incomparably vast and historical enterprise. And perhaps by describing his work, we can come to fathom the more mysterious dimensions of the dam. In order to better accomplish this task, let us quote the artist's own writings on his creation.
I have been told that perhaps the public at large seek a more concrete explanation of my work because they are lacking in understanding of the intangible values of life, and that it may be better to speak to them in terms of tons of concrete and tons of bronze. But I know from them that their wish to understand is great, their capacity is unlimited. The public ask themselves about the builders, What manner of men were these? The dam represents the building genius of America in the same sense as the pyramids represent that of ancient Egypt. And then as now, the sculptor answers objectively through an art which represents the man. To us comes a smile of recognition when we note that the pharaoh Khafre had a frame which would have sustained an all-American fullback and a face which would have ensured his election as president. If you would then follow my construction called the Winged Figures of the Republic on Hoover Dam, you would naturally expect me to first concentrate on the characteristics of the heads. There grew up with the settling of this continent a virile type of man, inured through constant adjustments into quickness of wit and beaten by privations into the strong winds of mountain and plain, into a facial physiognomy with the look of eagles. It is the American type. The cranions of the American type are finely shaped, high and dome-like of forehead, lean of cheeks, and potentially sparse of words. Such heads contain a largeness of spirit, a willingness to assume risks for an ideal. The eyes of the American type in their clear, piercing glance show the mental fire, daring, and imagination which crackles like burning coals within.
The conviction and courage we see in the Persian Gulf today is simply the American character in action, the indomitable spirit.
If nothing else, it is at least gratifying how powerfully one can hate. It is amazing how pure and simple it is, this blind rage. There is an undeniable pride when you sense its utter flawlessness. At this moment, it is immaculate and uncorruptible. This fabulous hate becomes frozen in the moment, squeezed tightly into its own deep intelligence. It would be a mistake to interfere with it by talking or moving or even thinking. And so it cannot last. Despite yourself, you begin to reflect on this deep hatred. You want to talk about it, but you can't say the right things, because that hatred is too pure to express. The expression of hatred, usually in short, intense units, is called a bedeligma, as when Emilia says to Othello, "O gull, O dolt, as ignorant as dirt." But a bedeligma is inappropriate here. All you can do is talk about not being able to talk about this hatred. Talking about not being able to talk about something is called an aporia. And it is this aporia which corrupts and confuses the exquisite purity of the hatred. And now a common spite comes to fill the void left by the decline of hatred, which is all the worse as it carries none of hatred's rich pleasures. But there's one last chance to restore it, the precessio. The precessio is pure silence, where no words are possible, or none are available, or none are desirable. You try the precessio by trying to clear your head of everything but hatred, but it is too late. Finally, even the hatred has become corrupted.
As an exaggeratio, this is quite stylish. Nonetheless, it is incumbent upon the responsible person to investigate such claims impartially and thoroughly.
It has been said, always by foreigners, of course, that Americans cannot think for themselves.
If this is true, then three questions seem naturally to arise. Firstly, from where then do their thoughts come? Secondly, who are these foreigners? And finally, do their thoughts come from foreigners, or do foreigners come from their thoughts?
This latter question is, of course, an epanados.
Epanados.
Being the repetition of words in the opposite order.
Another example of an epanados springs to mind, if I may. Woe unto them that call evil good, and good evil, that put darkness for light, and light for darkness. Isaiah book 5, verse 20.
And here is yet another, epanados, a sustained one to be sure, this time from Shuangsu. Words are not just wind. Words have something to say. But if what they have to say is not fixed, then do they really say something, or do they say nothing?
People suppose that words are different from the peeps of baby birds, but is there any difference, or isn't there?
What do words rely upon? That we have right and wrong? How can words exist and not be acceptable?
If we want to right their wrongs and wrong their rights, then the best thing to use is clarity.
Everything has its that. Everything has its this. From the point of view of that, you cannot see it. But through understanding, you can know it.
So I say that comes out of this, and this depends on that, which is to say that this and that give birth to each other.
But where there is birth, there must be death. And where there is death, there must be birth. Where there is recognition of right, there must be recognition of wrong.
Where there is recognition of wrong, there must be recognition of right. The sage, too, recognizes a this.
But a this, which is also a that which is also a this. His that has both a right and a wrong in it.
His this, too, has both a right and a wrong in it. So, in fact, does he still have a this and that?
Or does he no longer have a this and a that? So I say the best thing to use is clarity.
Nonetheless, what follows is, strangely enough, not the addition of needless words and thoughts, but the omission in the form of an enthymeme, where logically implied premises are left out.
Like when the president said most Americans know instinctively why we are at war in the Gulf.
Exactly. And there is another from kindred Shakespeare. Why dost thou call them knaves? Thou knowest them not.
Are they not Athenians?
Yes.
Then I repent not.
Journalistic literature has been justly celebrated for its crispness and succinctness. There is no question that it prizes brevity above all things. The figures of speech it has rebuffed more than any other must surely be those that require the unnecessary addition of words.
But we must state, always with the utmost clarity, precisely what rhetorical figure is being used. When the U.S. Border Patrol officer said that people who do not hold American citizenship have no rights while in the U.S., what was he being?
A mentiroso escabroso, I believe, is the correct term. Or perhaps, cabron chingan.
For example, perhaps it is snowing outside my window as I write. Not far away, the villagers are cooking supper over open fires in the flank of a great cave. They sing as they move about. Their diet consists mainly of crayfish, which abound in the nearby mountain lake. The flesh is stringy and has an unpleasant, gluey flavor. The incessant bleating of sheep makes sleeping difficult. Apparently, the natives have never thought to add mutton to their diet. I slept unusually well last night. You know, it's funny how... Never mind. You don't love me, do you?
Do you want me to?
I don't want you just to say it.
How can I show you that I love you?
You can't.
Then what good would it do you if I tried?